Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Bader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hey friends, Jason here. In this episode, I had the opportunity to catch up with Tim O'Keefe. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Huyett Company. They originally were GL Huyett, but they've dropped the GL and gone with a little rebranding there. But they're a manufacturer, importer, and master distributor of non-threaded fasteners. And so they do play in that fastener industry, but they've got a couple unique pieces there. But it was really kind of interesting listening to Tim's story, his transformation. This is definitely a story of somebody who really came away from distribution, didn't start in distribution, but saw an opportunity and saw something he really loved about the way that distribution feels, the tangible nature of distribution, and then ultimately manufacturing. I think one of the things that was so interesting in his story is talking about the transformation that occurred in working with a business coach. And I dare say that taught him that he didn't have to be as difficult an individual or run it in such a dictatorial type of manner in order to be really successful. In fact, that was really hampering his growth going forward. So again, really enjoyed the story, and I hope you do too. This episode of Distribution Talk is sponsored by InSequel Distribution Software. InSequel prides themselves on their rapid response customer support team. They maintain a very low 1 customer support person per 20 user ratio. Now, I have a long history with this company. I met the lead developer several years ago when he attended my inventory management seminar. He didn't just attend, he absorbed the content. Every couple of years, I head up to their Michigan headquarters to talk about product enhancements and see what they're up to. I always come away impressed. If you're ready to step up to a fully loaded, scalable distribution package at an affordable price, look no further than InSequel Distribution Software at www.insequel.com. That's INXSQL.com. Well, hey, Tim, welcome to Distribution Talk. Thanks for making the time to be with me.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
One of the things I love to get into, and really the reason I started this show, is I like to listen to the stories of why people got into distribution. I mean, that's my thing. And I think, actually audience members too. I remember, prior to putting together this show, clients used to ask me, well, how did other people get into this? Or, what are these other folks doing? And so long time in the making, I said, maybe I'll just ask people. I'll just interview them and say, hey, how did you get into this and why do you stay in it? So would you mind giving us a little history lesson?
Yeah. I was a business broker in the Kansas City area and had my own firm for 7 years, 1985 to 1992. And during that time, I sold about 300 companies, mostly represented the sell side. This was all pre-private equity. In some ways, it was pre-cell phone, although I got a bag phone in there somewhere.
Sure.
A lot of payphone usage.
Yeah,
so it was a different business at that time. But I kind of got to a point where I grew tired of lawyers and accountants. And I also experienced a loss of client because when I represent a seller and the business sells, I'm pretty much out of business and you have to start over again.
Yeah.
And so I made the decision. I like to be in self-employed and decided that I wanted to buy a business. I almost bought an overhead door business from a couple of guys that I really liked, which was always important to me. One of the things I realized as a business broker is in an acquisition, the seller is your best friend. And at that time, the book Barbarians at the Gate was a popular book about the story of K.K. Arbide and Philip Morris. And that book kind of portrayed the buyer as being a barbarian and, overrunning the seller. And I believe that in M&A, that's one of the worst things you can do. So who the seller was important to me. And so I almost bought this overhead door business. They ended up backing out at the last minute. The guy had a heart attack. He's only 52 years old. He just didn't want to retire. And I respected that. So I actually took a buyer out to a little company called GL Huyett. It was a husband and wife and one employee in the little town of Minneapolis, Kansas. Not Minnesota.
Not Minnesota, but
nope.
In Kansas.
And met Bob Hahn, who's the guy that was selling it. And I also like the fact that it was a tangible product. And I have I'm kind of a great American personal pride, Harley riding type dude. And I just like the fact that these are tangible objects that help the great American industrial machine. So it meant a lot to me. So I told him, I said, Bob, I think I want to buy your business. I have this buyer. I'm going to turn him over to a colleague in Wichita. So there's no conflict of interest, and you make your best deal. And at that time, I was living in Kansas City, which was about 3 hours away. And he wanted me to promise that I wouldn't relocate the business. And I told him that I would never be able to do that. I would always have to operate on the business location and pretty much all business decisions on what's in the best interest of the business. And that really hung him up. And in the end, my dad and my wife said, hey, look, Tim's a person of his word. When he says he can't promise that also you can't read into that he's going to move it. He's going to do what's in the best interest of the business. Right. And so as it turned out, that's what happened. We have been able to grow the business dramatically through the good efforts of all the good people that work with us, and basically thinking outside the box and being creative and focusing on culture. And so we've grown it a lot. So I still to this day take a great deal of pride in the fact that we are part of the great American industrial machine. We have parts in the Mars rover, John Deere tractors, cars, trucks, and I can go to the county fair and crawl underneath the combine and show my grandkids parts that ultimately trace back to us. And quite honestly, I take a great deal of satisfaction out of that.
That's a great point. It's funny. Early in my career, so I grew up in the construction supply business, and a lot of trapezes for hanging conduit and things like that. And I cut that strut at the ripe age of 14 years old. Yep. It was always a pleasure. I'll go into, sometimes airports or anytime I can see that exposed ceiling. And there's a certain sense of pride in that, because I'm like, I know what that is. Maybe at one time we supplied that. And I understand what you're saying. I think there is a tremendous amount of pride associated with that.
It's just different than, say, being in professional services like a lawyer. I mean, I suppose you could say we won a lawsuit or we had a really effective contract negotiation, but it just doesn't feel the same as the touch and feel. And I like that a lot.
You're absolutely right. It does not have that same feeling. And again, I've been on this side for 20 years, and it's not the same as when I was touching products and seeing how they were installed, things like that. So absolutely, I understand that. Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to touch on, though, let's go back to the business broker thing, because I am very curious about this. How did you get involved with business brokering?
So I was very young. I graduated from college, and then I went to work for Procter & Gamble, and I was the youngest unit sales manager in the company. My dad had started this business brokerage, and he was struggling financially.
Gotcha.
And he said, hey, look, I'm struggling, but I just think you would learn so much in such a short a period of time. I'd like you to try. And plus, my wife and I wanted to live closer to home. We were living in Louisville, Kentucky at that time. And so we made the jump. And as it turned out, I learned a lot about law, contract law, financials, reading financial statements, employee relations. It was a spectacular experience. And keep in mind, I sold everything from corner dry cleaners to manufacturing companies to wholesale warehouse operations, liquor stores. I mean, kind of spanned the gamut.
Isn't it fascinating how different people make money and different businesses? I mean, that's always fascinated me, especially, when I came over to this side and advisory business, I started to really get to see all these different ways people make money. And that was always really exciting for me, seeing all these just goofy nuances and things like that.
There's a company that we sold one time called Cookbook Publishing Company. And what they would do is they had started a business. It was probably a 30 or 40-year-old business by then. And this is pre a lot of the tools you see now. But what they would do is a church group or a Boy Scout troop or whatever would sell a cookbook as a fundraiser. And the recipes in the book were the stakeholders in that group. So these people would send their recipes like on recipe cards. And at that time, they had optical character recognition, which was really early. Mm-hmm. And they'd synthesize that into a cookbook. And they made a hell of a living publishing cookbooks for church groups.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Who'd ever think?
Right, exactly. I love unique stuff like that. I mean, that's just really interesting. And I think it requires something like what you were doing to expose you to this vast world of different ways of making money. And I think it ultimately helps us as business people to really be very open to ideas and opportunities out there.
It does. But, I believe this was Butch Cassidy. But somebody once asked Butch Cassidy, why does he rob banks? Because that's where the money's at. And
sure.
I tell our people all the time, I said, really, business is not that hard. It's what do customers want to buy?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to structure your business around being a bank. I want my customers to rob my bank
Right,
because
right.
it's where
Yeah,
the money's at. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I
And
do.
to me,
That's
it's just
funny.
there's a lot of common sense that is made to be more complex, but in the end, it's really, do you have a value proposition and do your customers want to buy from you?
Going back to, when you said, hey, I like this little business. I think I want to take a shot at this. What was day one like, or day two, if you will, that first week?
November 19th, 1992, light snow outside. And this business was located in some metal sheds. And the only room that was heated or cooled was the front room, which would probably be 15 by 20. That's 350 square feet. The rest of the facility was untreated air-wise. And I walk in and Bob Hahn looks at me and says, you need to go kick boxes. And I go, kick boxes? What do you mean? He goes, well, walk back there. And if you kick the box in this light, we need to order it. Write the part number down and we'll order it. And if it's not, we don't need to order it. And so I went out there.
Now that's some inventory management for you right there.
And I went out there and started, and I was freezing my butt off. And I came back in and I go, Bob, I'll never get this done. He goes, well, let me tell you a story. He goes, when I was in the Army, one day I got KP duty and I had to peel a bunch of potatoes. And so I was complaining to my officer and he said, tell you what, Bob, you grab a chair, you sit right outside that kitchen door and I'll hand you the potatoes one box at a time. He goes, if you think in terms of one box at a time, you'll get through it. And so that gave me my charge and I went back out there and kicked boxes one box at a time. I was able to reorder our inventory on the first day I was there.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's really funny. So as you expanded the company, and by the way, did you stay in Minneapolis or did you all move?
So we did. Now my family, we were in Kansas City, and
Right.
in 2000, my wife and I decided to relocate our family where my wife and I both grew up, which is a small town in Nebraska, Hastings, Nebraska. And in hindsight, it was potentially an error in that on a personal level, I really am not very connected to people, in that I'm always passing through. So with my family, I have 5 kids, and I think we're close, but I'm maybe not as close to my kids as other dads might be, because I was gone a lot. And then inside the company and in the community, I'm not really connected to anyone in the community. So in hindsight, that was probably an error, although the fact that we moved our kids to a rural area where they had to detassel corn in the summers was character building, and that turned out to be a spectacularly good decision.
Excellent. So tell me how the growth and expansion, you said, you've learned a lot of lessons over this period of time. So what can you share?
It's really, I would say there's four kind of drivers or phases that we've gone through. Early on, it was a new product introduction. And so basically listening to customers, and we did a lot of line expansion, product line expansion. And then the next phase is we added manufacturing. And we started manufacturing predominantly what are known as shaft keys and key stock. We grew it into some turn parts, turn pins, solid pins mostly. That was kind of the second phase. The third phase was global sourcing. So I started making trips overseas, recognizing that, the world was changing pretty rapidly. And then most recently, we, in 2015, started an e-commerce site, and we started marketing our products online. I would say that maybe one or two other things that are kind of current that complement that is we have a direct sales force, and a lot of people in our industry use manufacturers reps.
Sure.
And we also are big investing into data analytics, and we're exploring some artificial intelligence tools for demand planning right now.
Oh, nice. So when you moved from primarily a traditional distribution company over to manufacturing, what were some of the hurdles there that you needed to get over?
Well, I think some of those hurdles we still face today, in that manufacturing is a different business than distribution. And I would say that right now, a forward opportunity for us is I really don't feel like our cost accounting in our manufacturing area is state of the art yet. And I think some of that is encumbered by the legacy of starting off as a distribution business. And our manufacturing cost accounting is overly simplified. And so we have some complications there. Another thing is that just the style of talent, style of management, workflows, work processes, those are different. Your quality systems are different in that, when you're in distribution, if you have great suppliers, your quality system really is waiting for a customer to complain. You don't do a lot of in-process inspection,
Sure.
whereas in manufacturing, you've got statistical process control. You've got to make sure your raw material, in our particular case, our raw material we use to a near finished state. So there's a lot of inspection that goes into that. Your work in process inspection and final inspection. So the quality systems are different. So it's not as easy to put together as it sounds.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, distribution, cost accounting, and the accounting side of distribution is actually fairly simple.
It is.
It's a fairly simple, and I think sometimes when people look at it and they get a little overwhelmed, like, honestly, just kind of break it down. It's pretty darn simple. Even a guy like me can figure this one out.
One thing I was just going to say, though, that being the expert that you are in distribution, is with cost inflation of the last couple of years, I do think that distributors will have some tax decisions to make on whether to use FIFO or LIFO in their cost accounting. That type of decision making hasn't been around much for the last, well, probably since about the mid 80s, early 80s, because there hasn't really been a lot of cost changes. I mean, pretty minor inflation. But in an inflated situation, widget A is $1 and it was 50 cents 2 years ago. There are some tax strategies around LIFO and FIFO that a person can use that will distort, I guess, if you will, or complicate the distributor's cost accounting of their inventory.
Well, and yes, I mean, distributors, again, from a kind of a linear path, they've always believed was just slow increments of cost increase. And then there was this massive glut of cost increase. And then we'll probably see a deflation of that cost. And so that, yes, those permeations can make it very difficult to decide, well, exactly how much is that worth?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And then that translates out to your sales process.
Yep.
How much is that worth? I don't know. And so there's going to be a little creative accounting, I'm going to suspect, which again, in distribution, you can kind of get away with some of that.
Yeah.
You can get away with that. I think on the manufacturing side, it's a little bit more rigid, and you really, even though again, you said you're coming from a more simplistic view, which isn't all that bad, but you're right. Probably there are a few things that are not being taken into account, and maybe you're making yourself look feeling a little bit better about the products that you produce than maybe you should.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I remember years ago, I learned really kind of one of the big differences between the way that you make money in distribution versus the way you make money on manufacturing. Manufacturing is all about capacity because you got big, expensive machines and you got to keep them running. And the more capacity you can drive, the better off you are. So, and distribution just isn't like that. It doesn't think that way. So, yeah, two different avenues.
Well, and even within that, you can splinter manufacturing in that process type manufacturing really is about capacity. Contract manufacturing a lot of times is more about yield. What's my rate per hour on that machine? And if I have low hours on that machine and I can replace it with higher margin, higher hours, I may do that.
Yeah. No, again, a different mentality for sure. I mean, or just really just a different set of disciplines to kind of get yourself around, get your head around. And I think actually that makes it fun. It's a different way of thinking, not, because distribution can be very similar, especially in the operational side of it. No, this is a good deviation for you.
Yeah.
So tell me, throughout this expansion and these big changes, the 4 big changes, how did you evolve as a leader? What did you learn along the way?
Probably the second most transfigured individual after Jesus Christ himself. So, and even today, I'm a significant work in process.
Okay.
But, to go back to earlier, through product expansion, we added manufacturing, but I really sat mostly in the sales area of the business. And my influencing skills are significantly affected by a command type orientation. And that type of orientation really limits you as a leader. And in the 2008 timeframe, I had a CFO that pulled me aside one day and he said, "Tim, your mind is out. You got too many ideas. We don't have enough hours to implement all the ideas you have. I think we should get a consultant that our firm had when I was in public accounting and do some strategic planning." The guy's name was Chuck. I go, "Yep, Chuck, whatever you say, let's give it a shot." So we started meeting with this consultant, I, and they'd have me go down to Wichita, which is about an hour and 45 minutes away once a month for an afternoon. And they would ask me questions like, "What's your relationship with your wife? What's your relationship with your CFO? How do you communicate How do you have meetings? Things like this. And about 2 or 3 months in, the consultant asked me, well, Tim, what do you want to talk about next month? I go, I don't know. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. What do you want to talk about? And I said, well, I guess we're here to talk about strategic planning. He goes, no, why do you think you need an executive coach? And so all of a sudden, like, the light bulb went off. And I thought, well, Chuck's telling me a message here that I need to stop managing. I think I can say this on a podcast, like an asshole.
Yeah.
So I basically made me realize that I need to become far more self-aware. So since that time, which was 2009, so it's been now 13, 14 years, I've am a significant work in process. I'm a reformed asshole. So I've had to work carefully on my communication skills. I've studied a lot of various psychological assessments, Clifton Strengths, the process communication model, otherwise known as PCM, elements like that, in order to elevate my personal self-awareness as far as how I'm reacting to people and how people are reacting to me, and how I can improve my equity as an influencer, as a leader, as opposed to a commander like a manager. It's still a work in process, but it's been transformational for me. And I would say that's probably one of the most proud things, to be quite honest, in my life, in that a lot of people, they say, you get past X age, you'll never change. Well, I have, and I have a ways to go, probably be a work in process till the end, but it's been very gratifying for me. And I think a lot of people here at Huyett have been gratified by the experience as well.
Tim, I think I don't buy into that philosophy either, that, you get to a certain point, you can't change, because for me, that becomes complacency. And the listeners have heard this, but I'm going to share it again. I truly believe you only coast one way. If you are not growing, you're going to start going backwards or downhill. I truly believe that. And one of the things I really enjoyed, I saw that you had posted this on LinkedIn about servant style leadership. And I think this kind of sounds like it's something that has come out of this change in you over the last 12 to 13 years. So
it has. I mean, really, the way I always say is people work at Huyett. I work for them, which is a little inverted to the way a lot of other people think of things. But really, as a leader, your job is to create an environment for people to want to come to work, to want to contribute, to want to be a teammate as opposed to an individual, to put the team above themselves. And I just don't know of a way you can do that unless you model that servant type leadership first. And so, for example, here we have a rather large parking lot, and we don't have any executive reserved parking spots. So you park in the order you come in. So if I'm the last one here, I park the furthest away. The only reserved spots we have is we have one for an employee of the month, and then we have a big ASQ society, American Society for Quality. And if you're ASQ certified, you get a parking spot right by the door. Otherwise, there's no executive preference. There's no executive washrooms, no separate lunchrooms, anything like that at all. And I think that philosophy matriculates down through the organization, and it creates what we call a culture of excellence, as opposed to a culture of comfort where people are willing to make sacrifices for one another and for the team, because it's all about the greater good.
Yeah. And I like the example of the parking lot, because it's just so simple. It's a simple, when I drive up to work with a client, I can see that really quickly. In fact, actually, there's an attorney in town. It's right next to, where my son goes to tutoring. And I look at their parking lot, and there are 2 or 3 slots. I mean, this is this person's slot. Her name is on, one of the partners.
And there's probably a Porsche or a Mercedes or a BMW in there.
And it just, it sends it sends a visceral reaction. I don't like seeing that. And I almost want to go and just park in the lot just because, even though it tells me not to. It's a contrarian in me. But I think that is actually a very strong message that you can make, that you are not above anybody in that organization.
Jason, kind of related to that, which I think is kind of a hot topic right now in the workplace, is work from home. In that work from home really compromises company culture. I mean, there are some exceptions. If you're a Southwest Airlines reservation agent, I'm not sure why you can work that job from home. You're pretty much singular in your activities. A lot of that training can be simulated and delivered remotely. But if you're in any type of environment where there's a team aspect, I just don't think that work from home works. And I think to be a servant leader, even as an individual contributor, you need to be in the office. It's the only way your new folks can get trained and assimilated by the more seasoned and experienced folks. It's the only way you can bring people together. And so we've really been pretty anti work from home from day one. We did it a couple of times at the depths of COVID, but I just feel like that's another brick, if you will, in your cultural structural foundation. And for us, being in the office and being in the facility, because how would you like to be the order picker that works in our warehouse operation and has to be here every day, and you have people in the office where it can be optional? I think that's going to impair your culture.
Yeah, it sets different standards. And I think then that's a tough one. I mean, Tim, you're right. This is a hot debate. This is
it's a hot topic.
It is a tough debate. And I think, as you're recruiting into the organization, an awful lot of the people that you're recruiting, especially a newer generation is coming into the workforce, and they're expecting this option. And I recently had this conversation with a group of, I think it was marketing managers. That was it. It was a group of marketing managers. And they were talking about, literally, that's one of the first questions a candidate will ask. Can I work from home? How much can I work from home? And it puts them in a very difficult position because some of them love to work at home as well. So yeah, it is difficult for companies to set this policy.
So let's just take that one example.
Yeah.
So let's picture this. Let's picture 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And one marketing company or one distributor, all their team members work in the office, work in the operation. The other company works from home.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think is going to win that competitive battle 5 years from now and 10 years from now?
If I look back from a historical perspective, it's going to be the ones that are cohesive. The more cohesive that team. And I think to your point, it's very difficult to build that on Zoom. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, very difficult to build that cohesion on Zoom.
Well, and at the end of the day, everybody's going to skin the cat the way that they want to. And there are companies that are very successful out there that work from home. Best of luck to them.
Yeah,
it's just isn't going to happen here.
Yeah, and it becomes difficult. I mean, some of the things that you've learned over the last 13 years, it's difficult to be that when there aren't people in the office. Trying to be a servant style leader, I mean, can it be done? Sure. But I think that part of that servant style leader, I mean, my belief is you walk around and you talk to people. You get the personality. You are able to speak with them one-on-one, and that's where you build a relationship and you build trust among one another.
Yep. An extension, Jason, as I personally developed and crafted a renewed leadership style, then the next step for us in terms of creating culture was to put in place a performance management system. And so we do 3 performance evaluations here at Huyett a year, and everyone's paid a profit sharing bonus based on their performance, company profits, and company productivity. If you have people working from home, how do you assess their performance? Isn't that made more complex? A lot of people are experts in performance on weekends with their sports teams, but come Monday, suddenly they park the performance management at the gate. And there's no watching a film. There's no performance management.
Right.
In terms of management presence, I know you've seen that football practice before where there's a scissor lift in the middle of the field so the coach can see everything that's going on.
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
If all those players are working from home, practicing from home, you lose that line of sight. So not that we wanted to turn this podcast into a treatise on work from home.
No. I think that
it rolls in.
Yeah, the line of sight, actually, that really all of a sudden just resonated right there. Line of sight enhances that company culture that we're talking about. Interesting. Yeah. So going back to the beginning of work with this executive coach, and you are, as you said, the reformed asshole out there. If you had not done this, if you had not taken the advice of your CFO, if you had not spent time and really kind of absorbed what this coach was trying to do with you, what do you think you all would be today? Or how do you feel like your career would have gone?
Yeah, we'd be a lot smaller than we are, but we would also be, our culture here would feel more like a conventional family business where there's a a fatherly patriarch and a donut-shaped organization chart around it, and all the decisions go through the center of the donut, whereas we are actually a pretty professionally managed organization. I have a complete executive team. They are allowed free will to do what they feel like they need to do to make the business successful. And so, I'm 61. I'm not going to live forever. And so I think that the prospects and potential for us to remain a privately held company for maybe another generation are much higher than if I had not changed and we were just your typical bodega type operation with the proprietor in the middle of the donut. And I think that's where we would have ended
Interesting.
up.
No, it's a great point. So I want to change gears here for a moment and talk about the industry, giving back to the industry. And I know you've been involved with NFDA, the Fastener Distributor Association. And tell us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about some of that giving back, the board involvement.
Yeah. Well, in our particular industry, for starters, our industry from a trade association standpoint is limited in that our national trade show, or there are actually two now, are owned by companies, for-profit companies. And so our industry does not benefit from the revenue that comes out of those shows flowing back into the participants in the industry themselves. And so there is the National Fastener Distributor Association, which is a distributor-focused organization in our particular fastener industry. That's the leading national organization. And then there are an array of regional associations around the country, mostly carrying geographic connotations. There's a Southeast Fastener Association, a Southwest Fastener Association. There's one called Pac West, which is a West Coast.
I am very familiar with Pac West. Yeah, I've done work with them. Yeah.
And I think that the primary benefit of a trade association is networking, especially in an industry like ours where it's somewhat specialty and it's geographically dispersed. And when you're in an industry like that, there's an element of solitary confinement. I'm out here in Kansas in the middle of nowhere on my own. And yet there are other people in our industry that I can learn from and get better ideas from. And so a trade association provides an opportunity for you to do that. And so I've been involved, and our firm has been involved in trade associations. I was the associate vice chair of the NFDA back 2008, 2009 timeframe. I'm actually involved in a volunteer project for them right now, helping us to plan an executive summit that we're having in late October out in Scottsdale. We have one of our regional sales managers, I think is currently president or has been, of the North Coast Fastener Association. We have an individual that was president of the Southwest Fasteners Association, the North Coast, which is up in the New England area, and the Southeast. So we've had a lot of people from our company involved in these. And what it does is it gives you an opportunity to give back from the standpoint that it takes volunteer time to glue these associations together and to create a sufficient enough experience where people are willing to pay a dues to belong. And so we're happy to have had the opportunity to give back and be part of the industry that way.
And I think it's very in line with the servant style management philosophy that I give so that others can thrive. I mean, I think that's absolutely in line with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer in trade associations and groups, and I think you just absolutely get more out of that experience than you put in.
It's going to get harder, Jason, because with private equity rolling up a lot of these distributors, there's fewer and fewer potential members out there. So I think that the profile of trade associations in industrial distribution are going to change. My guess is that they're going to become smaller, more exquisite, more personal, and probably higher cost. Maybe even like more luxurious is be a way for me to say that.
Well, I think the value proposition has to change. And that's really, and I know a lot of associations are struggling with that, to change that value proposition. Hey, look, they've run on a really good platform for a very, very long time. But I think you're right that there is a change in landscape that's going to have to be honored here. And really, they're going to have to look at how can I cater to that independent and really in a more meaningful way than just a trade show and a gathering. What can we do to further that value proposition into that member organization?
Yeah.
If you were to give advice to a younger person in the industry wanting to be involved with, get involved and get deep, what would you tell them to do? I mean, how do they break in?
I think attending trade association events is important. One thing the NFDA has done this past year is they created a mentorship program. And we have a few people that are involved in that program, and the feedback I've heard is very positive. And so, that mentorship is not only an opportunity to learn from someone that's more experienced than you, but also it's a networking opportunity itself. So that if you have a dilemma or a problem, hey, I got this problem with finding this part or whatever, you've got people you can call to say, hey, can you help me out? But I also think in our particular industry, I guess I can say this about industrial distribution generally, and this is going to kind of sound like a slam, and I don't necessarily mean that, but the people that get into this type of business are not the people that graduate at the top of the class at Harvard. And so I think that if you are in the industry, you can quickly differentiate yourself individually as a contributor and as a leader by studying best practices. You get a subscription to the Harvard Business Review for starters. You listen to podcasts like this, and I know that sounds like a blatant promo for you.
Hey, I love it. I'll take that, man. I will take that plug.
But your ambitions here, Jason, as mine are genuine. We want to help other people. And so I think that if someone young needs to read the Wall Street Journal, read the Harvard Business Review, and study the best practices of business in general, and not just in the wholesale trade, because there's a greater level of sophistication in other industries outside of this industry. And so that's where I think you can get the so-called turbocharger effect on your career in this type of business.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think that those who want to sharpen the saw, I mean, that is
Yes.
really going to differentiate you from your peers out there. And here's the other thing, Tim, in these vertical markets, you have the opportunity to leapfrog. I mean, at a fairly young age. I mean, that's one of the things I remember sharing a conversation I had with a gentleman named Steve Deist. We were talking about what other industry can you have this P&L responsibility over, a multi-million-dollar branch location at the age of 23.
Yeah.
That, yes, you can differentiate yourself very quickly if you're willing to put in a little.
Yep. I think the other thing related too, though, is that I think that people need to be selective, especially earlier in their career, about the opportunities they take. There's a temptation to chase paycheck only.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you really want to do is, what company am I going to work at, and who am I going to work for, and who am I going to work with, and what can I expect to learn and nurture and be developed in this particular operation?
Yeah, I think that, it's something that really, you're right, making that career choice, choosing the character of the individuals that you're associating with going forward. I think that sometimes I know that younger generations get accused of job hopping. They get a bad rap for job hopping.
Yep.
And I think, again, someone shared with me that really it's because of the integrity of the organizations that they're joining and the inability to keep these individuals fed. So I think some of the blame comes on our side too, on the organizational side, that, we're not providing that. But I think that's really for that young person in their career to kind of ferret out and just say, hey, who am I going to be working with? Who do I want to learn from going forward?
Yes, I agree.
Well, hey, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. This was a lot of fun, getting to know you a little bit better and learning a little bit about your journeys. Hey, I look forward to the next time our paths cross.
You bet. I do too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider sharing with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast application. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by the brilliant team at the Creative Impostor Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, The Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com.